Alright, so today I'm going to be tying a topwater mouse fly pattern, and I've had some decent luck with this pattern on bass, and it's supposed to be a really good pattern for big trout, especially brown trout, because a lot of trout will take mice that swim across the surface of the water, and this fly is going to be very simple. As you could probably see in the thumbnail, it only uses zonker strips and foam. I do not have one here today as an example, but to give you an idea of how this fly looks, this will be the tail, which is made of zonker strips, which I've stripped most of. And then for the body, I'm going to be winding this zonker strip around the hook. And then the top part of the body is simply going to be dark brown. I believe this is 3 or 4 millimeter foam. And the hook in the vise is a TMCO 8089 in size 8. To begin this fly, I begin my thread base at around the midpoint of the hook, and I just wrap that down until the tag end is secured, at which point I can trim. From here, I'll make sure that's extra secured by going over it with a second layer, because you want this fly to be very strong, because it's going to withstand a lot of hard hits from a lot of fish if you fish it right. Now for the tail, I have this zonker strip, which, as I've showed you, I've stripped all but just the top little, I'd say it's probably quarter, half inch, and that really just depends on preference, how much you strip. So I'm going to lay this down here, and I don't want too much of it coming off. I don't want the tail to be crazy long, because the areas I haven't stripped sort of fill in on that. So I just want to secure this with a lot of touching turns. Trim it. And tie down the tag end. And now for a little bit of extra strength, I'm just going to do some cross wraps on it, which you can just do by going up and left, and then up and right, over and over again. And this should be pretty well secured. Yeah, I'm pulling that pretty hard, and it's not budging. So now it's time to tie in the foam. For this, I just want to cut a nice little strip out of the foam, and I don't want it to be too thick, but I also don't want it to be that thin. So when I measure it up against the hook gap, it ends up looking something like this, so almost the hook gap in width, and this ends up lining up perfectly with how I want the profile of this fly to be. Now I'm going to trim one end of my foam into a nice point like this, and I'm going to lay it down like so, bring my thread back to here, and begin tying it in at the point. From here, I'll take touching turns back, because I want this foam to be nice and secure on this fly, because as I mentioned, it's going to get a lot of good hits depending on where and how you fish it. But this is also a topwater pattern, so you can't expect a good deal of this fly getting bumped around, no matter where you're at or what you're fishing for. This fly also apparently works pretty well for pike and muskie, and I mean, I personally have absolutely zero experience with those fish, but I imagine it works pretty well. I mean, muskie will eat anything that touches the water and moves, a baby duck, an adult duck, any type of fish. So yeah, I imagine this is a pretty good multi-species fly. And now I just want to test that by pulling it over here, because you are going to end up leaving a little bit of this hanging off to give it a bit of a popping motion. Now I'm going to bring my thread back just a little bit down that little thread ramp that I've produced. And now I'm going to take this zonker strip, which I've stripped off just a little bit of it, but I've kept most of it. And this part is actually up to you for the most part. You can either use a dubbing loop or a dubbing brush type deal on this using the fur from your zonker strip, but I find it much easier to just tie it in directly and wrap it onto the hook shank directly, because it takes a lot less time and gives you a much more neat result, especially if you're new to tying with stuff like this. Now I just want to bring this back to around where I tied in the foam. And now I'm going to bring it forward. And the thread buildup on this pattern is no big deal, even though there is a massive amount of thread right there. But in the end, with this fly, it does not matter at all how much thread is on here. Now I'm going to take my zonker strip, and I'm going to try and wrap it this way, because this is how I wrap things. However, it does not look like the skin part of the strip is in contact, so I'm going to wrap it this way, actually. Now this part might get a bit messy and uneven looking, and you can expect to use most or all of your zonker strip when you do this part. So I'm just going to bring it up to here. I'm going to take one really tight wrap to secure that, and then a bunch more, keeping insane tension on that thread. And then I'm going to trim that down as close as I can. Push it back so that it's not by the eye of the hook, because you want an open eye on this one. And then I'm just going to take some wraps to secure that down. Now we have this, which does not look particularly good as a fly. However, this is where it's about to change. Now I'm going to take this foam, and I'm going to stretch it over the hook shank, and this pushes down all of the zonker strips. And if I rotate it real quick, I'll show you this. And this fly has an amazing profile when in the water. Towards the end of this video, I'll actually do a quick section showing exactly what it looks like when it gets wet. But it looks very realistic to what I'd expect a wet mouse would look like. I mean, I've never seen a wet mouse personally, because I've never seen one swimming around. But, I mean, I guess the fish have, because this fly does produce. Alright, so I'm just going to tie this in. And I'm actually going to leave this at the length that it's at right now. And you can see, this looks pretty good. It looks decent. However, I do want to finish this off with a little bit of gray Rabbitron dubbing. This fly uses a lot of rabbit materials between the zonker strips and the Rabbitron. So now I'm just going to tie in a little bit there to make a little collar and make that look neater. And then I'm going to come down here to where just this little area was exposed. And I'm going to give it just a quick wrap of the Rabbitron. And then maybe a bit more. Because this fly doesn't really have to look neat, because when a fish is eating a mouse, I guess it really just doesn't care that much about what it eats, because it's pretty hungry. But I prefer my flies to look presentable, mainly to other fishermen, not the fish. This fly is difficult to get the head right on, so if you struggle with that, I do recommend the dubbing brush as opposed to the zonker strip type hackle that I did. So you can see even right here, I'm struggling with it much more than I would like to be. So I'm just going to try and bring it back as far as I can, because I want to keep this hook eye open. And right now, it's pretty much, let me check. Yeah, it's fully open right now. So I'm just going to quit while I'm ahead and do my quick whip finish. For this, I like to bring the whip finish. Oh, shoot, did that thing. But for this fly, what I was saying is I like to do the whip finish going backwards so that you do not clog the eye of the hook, because it's pretty important to keep the eye of the hook open on any fly. I hate it when I order a fly, especially in the eye of the hook isn't open, but it's really painful when you tie one and it's not. So I just want to avoid any of that. And yeah, I recommend doing a little coat of crazy glue on the head. And another thing, when you don't get the eye of the hook exactly open, is to use your bodkin or your tying needle to open that up. And I'm cleaning this off right now. I had some paint on it, from another fly. So I'm going to clean it off with this razor blade. And I apologize for that sound. That is one of the worst sounds I've ever heard. And you see, I'm just going to edge some of it back just by wedging it in here. And then I'm going to do a coating of crazy glue to make sure that that stays tight. And yeah, before I end this video real quick, I'd like to do a little clip showing what this fly looks like wet. So I'm going to wet this fly and then put it back in the vise. Alright, so here we have what the fly looks like wet, and that transition probably turned out really weird, but that's alright. So you can see here, if I rotate it around, it does the foam top, but then the bottom of it just looks really good and really realistic to what I think a mouse would look like when it was swimming. And yeah, this is a pretty well-known pattern. I've seen a lot of variations of it, so I am going to try and figure out its name and put that in the title. But yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, please feel free to comment any of your thoughts on this video and like and subscribe for more similar videos to this. Thank you for watching.